Well, hello again. Welcome back. This is Monday, the 23rd of March. What was going to be the first day, first full run through of the show, the musical. As I was sitting yesterday thinking about my life, I was like, wow, I wish I was at Tech Day right now. I didn't think I'd ever wish that, but I wish I was. And then this is, even though it's a crazy, crazy time, it still is one of my favorite weeks out of the year, couple weeks leading up to the show. So I am sad to be missing it right now, but I am happy that we should be able to still do the show at some point. So it is a temporary sadness that will be replaced by hopefully not sadness when we finally do the show. I digress. So a couple things. Astute observers will notice I got myself a new chair. It is leather. It's very soft and cushy. It is comfy. So there I am. I'm sitting in this new chair. Look at me. It's very, very nice. It's cozy. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I had said last week that there should be some updates coming out on Friday of last week, the 20th, about the AP test. AP test update. So we have an update from Friday. It is a big update. We were questioning what would the test look like? Is there still going to be a test? The answer to the second question, is there still going to be a test? The answer is yes, there still will be a test. The answer to the first question, what does the test look like? That's a little bit up in the air. The third question would be, I'll get back to that first question. The third question would be, is the test in person or online? The answer to that question is, it is going to be online. You may have already heard all this information from other people, so that's fine. If so, this is review. If not, this is all new information, which is good to know. My understanding, what I read from the AP, the College Board, is that they will be offering the test online in a 45-minute time frame. So originally the test, it was going to be like 3.5 hours. Now the test is going to be like 30 or 45 minutes. That being said, I don't think there's going to be any essay on it. I don't think there's going to be a DBQ. I don't think there's going to be a long essay question. I don't think there's going to be a lot of multiple choice. I don't know what's going to be on it. They do not know yet. They have not told us. We will find out in about a week and a half, on April 3rd, which is next Friday. They will post another update explaining what the test will look like for each discipline, each content. So for now, we don't know. For now, we know that the test will happen, and it will happen. We're not sure when yet, but it will be online when we take it. So that's kind of the big details. Oh, there's another big detail. This big detail is not going to affect us immediately. It will affect us, though, coming up in probably a week. The College Board said that our test that is going to be given out is only going to be covering historical periods 1 through 7, which, if you have been following along, we were scheduled to take a period 7 test last Monday, a week from today, or a week before today, a week ago, our first day that we didn't have school. We have finished period 7 already. That goes all the way up till 1945, which is the Second World War and the end of that. So you will notice that we are past that already. That being said, I still see value in continuing on in some capacity, maybe not in as much depth as we may have wanted to go into beforehand, but I still want to continue on. I still think it's going to be helpful to you guys to do so. Think about sometimes with essays. I know that there's probably not going to be a full essay on there on this test, but thinking about the complex understanding connecting to different points in history, you kind of need to know some current stuff to tie that stuff together to. I am not saying that we're going to continue all the way through the present day and then only give ourselves a couple weeks for review. I am going to say I think I'm probably going to get into the 1960s and then stop. This chapter that we're in right now, we'll start it today. Chapter 37 is basically about 1952 to 1960. So we will be up to, by Wednesday-ish, 1960. So I still see some value in going into the 60s a little bit. It will be helpful, I think. So that's kind of the plan, at least at this point. I still might change my opinion on all this. I know I've been talking to Mr. Cuffs, and he's like, yeah, he's a little bit behind us, actually. But he doesn't want to go further. So it's kind of up to him. He can kind of decide what he wants to do. It might be the smarter way to go about it. I don't know. My gut tells me that I think I'd rather have you guys know a little bit more information about modern day stuff, or closer to modern day stuff, into Vietnam, maybe, into Kennedy, LBJ, that sort of time period. I think that that's going to be helpful for you. I don't know for sure. I'm just going with my gut. So I think that's what we're going to do, unless my gut changes drastically within the next couple weeks. But that means that we will probably be only going forward for another couple weeks, and then devoting all of our time to review, which should be helpful for us as we get more of a clear picture next Friday on what the test will actually look like for us. So if you have specific questions about that test, about what it's going to look like, I might be able to answer them. I would direct you to the College Board website. I would also direct those questions to me, and I will try to answer them if I can. So ask me any questions, ask away, and I will hopefully answer them as best as I can. Or if not, I will look up the answer or talk to somebody else and get the answer for you. So that being said, that was a long AP test update. We're at 7 minutes already. The second item is Cuffs Live. This is a title that I gave it. Mr. Cuffs did not give it the title Cuffs Live. But Mr. Cuffs goes live every day on Instagram from 11 to 11:30-ish. I tuned in on Friday because, that's what you do when you're down here in the coronavirus bunker. You just watch things and don't waste your time, I guess. So I watched. It was pretty good. What he does is he basically just talks for 30 minutes, similar to what I'm doing here. It might be helpful to do to listen to. He was going through the Depression, getting into the beginning of World War II on Friday. So he answers a bunch of questions. You could even go on there and ask him questions, and he knows you guys, so he would answer your questions. He was talking to me on the video. So I would suggest doing that if you have a few extra minutes in the morning at 11 a.m., 11 to 11:30. Watch along. It would be good review, but it also good to just hear another person talking at you. So if you have the time, you don't have to, obviously, but if you have the time, it wouldn't hurt. It could not hurt you to do that. So all that being said, we are getting into Chapter 37, which is 1952 to 1960. The title here is The Eisenhower Era. The Eisenhower Era. We had talked about Harry Truman and how Harry Truman was president right after World War II, or I guess at the tail end of World War II and the following years afterwards, and kind of guides America through that transition, as well as the growth of containment policy and into Korea and all that. We now need to get into more of the details about the 1950s with Eisenhower, the next president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was a World War II general responsible for a lot of our actions in the European theater, I guess I might say. He was the commander of the American forces in Europe, so or at least partly in Europe. So we're going to get into this. Getting into the 1950s, we start to notice a lot of changes in American society. A lot of details start to switch around on us when we think about what American society has been like. 1950 or the 1950s are kind of a moment here where we've got prosperity after the war, and lots of good stuff is kind of happening here. The 1950s, if I was to think back to the 1950s, I picture in my head kind of this classic American dream sort of picture with kind of a wife or a husband and a wife standing in front of their suburban home, and they got two kids, a boy and a girl. They've got a dog, and they're standing there posing for a picture. They got a car in the driveway, the white picket fence, all that stuff. I think of the 1950s. So that is kind of the details that I think of when I think of this time period. It's just a very I want to say innocent, but I don't know if that's the right word. Feels very innocent in the 1950s. So we'll get into it. I have posted on this classroom page, along with this video, I posted a couple of documents, my notes for this. I have posted a PowerPoint, which I will pull up here in a second, and I have posted a notes page that you can write stuff down on. So I will get the PowerPoint pulled up, and then I will be right back here. So bear with me. Okay, I'm back. So I've got everything ready to go here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So hopefully you have out in front of you by now the chapter 37 notes, so you can kind of follow along. So where we need to start out here is changing 1950s society. There was a number of new industries that are kind of popping up here, or maybe not new industries, but expansion of older industries. Those industries being the electronics industry, starting with computers. Computers are not widespread at this point, but they are kind of being made first here in the 1950s. IBM is a famous company, computer making company from back in the day. They are active at this point. They are kind of the big fish in the pond here in regards to that. The other industry would be the aerospace industry, building passenger airliners. So you guys know of like Boeing and things like that, or companies like that. They are starting out at this time building passenger airliners and being able to allow people to take travel that way, or travel that way. So the aerospace industries are growing at this point too. Now, there is a growth in the number of what we would call white collar workers. So I've got a picture here. This is a picture of a modern day office or I guess a modern office from the 1950s. You have just a bunch of people there. White collar workers are different from blue collar workers. Blue collar are basically manual labor workers, people who work with their hands. They wouldn't be called unskilled, but they would be, like carpenters or landscapers. Those are blue collar workers. White collar workers, however, use, I don't know, they wear white collars. They wear shirts and ties, work in offices, that sort of thing. So that is the type of person that we're talking about here. So you see here an office space that is full of white-collar workers in the 1950s. Union memberships, because of this, start declining. This is the first, in 1956, this is the first time when white-collar workers actually outnumbered the number of blue-collar workers in America, ever, to my knowledge. So union memberships start dropping because white-collar workers did not join unions as much as blue-collar workers. Working conditions were much better for these office workers than they were working manual labor jobs like these blue-collar workers were having to do. So the majority of these people aren't joining unions. Interestingly enough, also, we've got a new group entering the workforce in large numbers. That would be women. Women are filling a large number of these service jobs. I've got written down on my notes here, the majority of clerical or clerks and service job openings created after 1950 were filled by women. So men are coming back to the workforce after World War II, but also women are taking new roles in society and taking new roles in the workforce. So that would be kind of where you get the stereotypical male boss, female secretary sort of thing. You guys know from 9 to 5 that's kind of what's being noted there in that musical as kind of this power struggle between men and women in the workforce, and oftentimes men weren't suited to do the job, and women were more suited to do so. So that's kind of what you end up with. So that's good to connect it to something like that that you know of already. Now, there is another thing that I need to mention. It is on your notes sheet called the Feminist Movement with Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan ended up in 1963, wrote a very famous book. This book, if you end up doing that review sheet with the famous books in American history, that book is on here. It's called The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique. Is kind of the birth of the women's rights movement, or the feminist movement in some cases. This discusses the widespread unhappiness that women are kind of dealing with here in life. The famous line of this book, it's kind of taking a piece out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx ends his book by saying, "Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains." Very ominous, right? Betty Friedan writes about feminists, right? So she writes at the very end, and it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek pun, but also true. She says, "Women of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your vacuum cleaners." Okay, direct quote. I'm not lying about that. So you have nothing to lose but your vacuum cleaners, meaning, hey, give up what you've got, which isn't all that great. So you can't lose. You're only going to gain stuff out of this feminist movement. So that would be the feminist movement and Betty Friedan here. Now, let's go ahead and move on to some innovation, or I guess some new people who are there. I've got written down there that you've got credit cards that are coming out. You've got fast food, McDonald's, different fast food outlets like that are being created. I'm not sure when Kentucky Fried Chicken was around. I'm pretty sure Colonel Harlan Sanders would have been around at this point. He's a pretty old dude. And maybe Wendy's. Doug Thomas from Wendy's. I'm not sure on any of the dates of these, by the way, but I'm just saying it's kind of coming into our American society at this point is fast food. The third thing there would be new forms of recreation. You end up with a lot of new ways for people to use their leisure time. Now, a couple important people to mention. This is kind of like a culture war sort of moment here, similar to the 1920s in some ways. If you remember the culture wars between fundamentalists and modernists in the 1920s, all centered around the Scopes trial. But famous people like Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan and H.L. Mencken and people like that. If you don't know any of these people, you should look them up and remember them. So those three people, rewind the video and look them up. In the 1950s, you have a similar culture crisis, a similar culture war. Pictured here is an evangelist. Evangelist, is that the right emphasis? I had the emphasis on the wrong syllable there. He's an evangelist. His name is Billy Graham. He's a famous guy. You've heard of him before, I'm sure. He just passed away a year ago. He was very old at that point. But here he is, very young in the 1950s. And he is an evangelist. He is spreading Christianity. He uses the TV, which is something that was just coming into use in the 1950s, to be able to kind of spread his message around. Also, another famous guy here, pretty much the opposite, would be Elvis Presley. Okay, Elvis Presley used new musical style, transformed music in the 1950s, utilizing new music style called, of course, rock and roll. So there he is doing hip gyrations and things like that people didn't want their kids to see. So he is pictured there. And if you think about the differences between Billy Graham and Elvis Presley and how they are really advocating for different things in American society, kind of return to religion in one case and then kind of a social liberation sort of thing in the other case. It is kind of a second wave of the culture wars, I guess you might say. So we'll go on to Eisenhower leads, and then I think we'll be done for the day because we're running low on time already. The announcements took too long. They were good announcements, so they were good, high quality announcements. So let's talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower. I have a picture here of Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower is nominated as a Republican. He was kind of a wild card in terms of who he was going to run for. Republicans, Democrats, nobody really knew. Eisenhower was actually considered for the Democratic nomination in 1948. But he runs as a Republican in 1952 against a Democrat. His name is Adlai Stevenson. So Eisenhower, very well-known guy. He is, like I said before we started our notes, he is a World War II general, very well-known guy. People like him. His campaign slogan is Dwight D. Eisenhower, but his nickname was Ike, Ike Eisenhower. And so his campaign slogan was, "We like Ike." And people had buttons and whatnot, but we like Ike. Everybody liked him, so he was well liked by the public. He wins the election by a large margin. This is not considered to be the first TV election. That usually is reserved for 1960, and we'll get there next week, and I'll tell you why that's the case. But in 1952, he ends up using the TV campaign a little bit. It's not as widespread as it was later on, and definitely not as widespread as it was or as it is nowadays. So Dwight D. Eisenhower ends up trying to end the Korean War. The Korean War had kind of been going on, and if you remember from last time, there was kind of this middle ground that had been reached, and nobody had really advanced past it for a few years. They had reached the middle ground by the middle of 1951. Back towards the 38th parallel in Korea. So Dwight D. Eisenhower says, okay, well, what are we doing? We're fighting this war, and we really have no business doing it, and there's no gains are going to be made by any of this. So in 1953, in July, Eisenhower ends up threatening to use nuclear weapons to end the war. And it's amazing how when a little bit of threat of nuclear weapons happens, how fast people make the decision to actually sign a peace agreement. So they actually make a ceasefire, an armistice. There is still currently an armistice. The war is still technically going on. If you were to ask South Korea and North Korea, they would say they are still at war with the other side, but they are just not fighting at the moment. So they are still in a war at this point, just not in a war. So it's kind of interesting. It's like a quasi-war sort of thing. So armistice is signed, ending America's involvement in the Korean War. So Korea remains divided, even though this war took place, remains divided at that 38th parallel for the most part. It's a little bit of a scraggly line, but it's close. Now, Dwight D. Eisenhower, again, beyond Korea, when he ends up being a leader, what sort of leader is he? He is kind of a mixture of a liberal and a conservative. He likes expanding the provisions for people to help people out. He's more liberal in terms of his social stuff, but in terms of his money side, he is a conservative. He does not want to spend too much money. He tries to make the budget balanced. World War II had expanded our budget. The New Deal had expanded our budget. So his goal is to balance the budget in most cases. So wanted to balance the budget. Tries, sometimes successful, sometimes not successful. Frequently fails at doing that. And he's also trying to take a hardline stance against communism and socialism. So he is conservative in that regard, wanting to advocate for kind of a crackdown on those policies. So we are very much afraid at this point of communist spread. Now, last thing we got to mention here is probably his most well-known program that he's known for here. This is the the Federal Highway Act in 1956. In 1956, it creates the Interstate Highway Program. You have probably seen on the side of the road, if you ever drive the highways, oftentimes they have a little a little sign on the post there. They say Eisenhower Highway System or something like that, Interstate Highway Defense System, something like that. I don't remember the exact words. The idea with these interstate highways are twofold. Transportation, number one, so ease of transportation for most Americans. You've got people living in suburbs at this point, so why not connect those things with the cities? Okay, we'll make highways that go downtown. They'll be high capacity. You can drive a lot of cars on them, 2 lanes, 4 lanes, some more. You've got a lot of opportunity for people to be able to travel around. So that's the first one. The second one is defense, if you think about it. So it says National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Defense meaning you have the ability to, if you need to, clear these highways and move things around on them. Maybe it's moving people around. Maybe there's a nuclear threat in a city and you need to get people out of there. You better have a big road that you can throw everybody on to get them out of there. An emergency detour, if you will. So there are a lot of emergency detours set up. There are emergency detours for, if you've ever driven Route 90 outside of Rochester, it says emergency detour A this way. So you follow that way to get out of the area, to get out of the city. So there's those sorts of things. If they need to move troops around, if they need to move supplies around, they can do that easily enough. And these roads are massive. These roads are really wide, the widest roads in the country. There was nothing really like this. So you can move all this equipment around really quickly and clear these roads if you need to. And then finally, you can actually land planes on these things in some places. Most highways have pretty straight, long straightaways where you can land an airplane if you need to. It's wide enough, it is straight enough, it's flat enough. It is gradual. You could land an airplane if you needed to. So there's spaces that are designed for that too. So it's kind of a very interesting thing that gets set up. We mostly just think about them as, ooh, these are the cool roads where we get to go 70 or we get to go 65. Not 70, that's breaking the law. 65 on. Only 65. Otherwise, that's all we think about them as. But they served a purpose back during the middle of this Cold War when a nuclear threat was a big possibility for us, and potential quick mobilization of troops was necessary. So these interstate highways under the Federal Highway Act were pretty important to kind of advancing America at this point and turning us into kind of a developed country, or I guess continuing our development as a first world country. So I think I'm going to leave off there. We'll talk about McCarthyism tomorrow, and then we'll get into civil rights and stuff like that. So I think that's all I've got. Again, if you have any questions about this AP test in the schedule, look it up yourself or talk to me. Okay, let me know. Shoot me an email, and I can answer those things. So again. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was good. If you have any questions, let me know. We will be back here and better than ever tomorrow. Hopefully we make it that far. Whoop, whoop. And then we will go on from there. So I think that's all I've got. This is Mr. Miller signing off.